Welcome back. In this third module, I want to drive home the distinctions between dynamic and ordinary capabilities. As I said, you can think of dynamic capabilities as being necessary and possibly sufficient, whereas ordinary capabilities are necessary but not sufficient. Now, the challenge we face is that too often there is not enough attention given to big strategic decisions. That what happens is that the everyday drives out the long-term strategic decisions. Alfred Chandler, the famous business historian, recognized this a long time ago and suggested for that reason that companies needed to divisionalize, because as companies grew larger with what he called a unitary structure, the everyday would drive out the strategic. So that's something that companies have to deal with and need to fix. So let's think about that in a little more detail and think about the fact that the prioritization of ordinary capabilities can actually weaken dynamic capabilities and vice versa. Michael Tushman, who is a professor at the Harvard Business School and was at Columbia for many years, noted that activities focused on measurable efficiency drive out variance-increasing activities and thus affect an organization's ability to innovate and adapt outside of existing trajectories. So we love KPIs and other metrics, but we have to be careful with KPIs and other metrics, because in pursuing them, we may end up actually harming innovation. And the ordinary can drive out the dynamic perhaps more readily than the dynamic can drive out the ordinary. So this is the balance that management must work with every day. And to amplify this point, I'm willing to take on the concept of best practices. Who can argue with best practices? Well, I'm going to argue with best practices. Best practices alone insufficient to ensure a firm's success and survival, except in weak competitive environments. Best practices are usually about ordinary capabilities, and companies that think that the job is done when they've implemented best practices deceiving themselves. The job is never done, and you have to innovate constantly. And of course, innovation is often the enemy of best practices. There's nothing that'll mess up your operations more than innovation. So in pursuing best practices, you have to have your head screwed on the right way and recognize that yes, you can get efficiencies from best practices, but the world and competition isn't just about efficiencies. It's about effectiveness, and it's about innovations. And there's no good, there's nothing good, there's no benefit that comes from being great at delivering the wrong products. So Henry Ford discovered that with a Model T towards the end of the life cycle. Got more and more efficient, the KPIs got better and better, but the product fell behind the market, and in the end he had to shut down the Ford Motor Company for 18 months to produce the Model A Ford. So innovation is necessary, and he should have been working on the Model A when he was working on the Model T, but he let efficiencies get in the way. So being a top performer in productivity today is unlikely to lead to long-term profit. So be careful with best practices and be careful with KPIs. And that's the difference between being busy and generating profit and building for the future. The difference between ordinary and dynamic capabilities is the difference between activity and productivity. If you got strong ordinary capabilities, you'll stay busy and you may be efficient, but you'll be competing with a bunch of other companies that are also got the same best practices. The nature of best practices is that they diffuse rapidly. So you'll stay busy. In fact, you'll even run faster and faster, but you won't get more profitable, and your productivity won't improve. So you get some momentary improvement in productivity, but then you won't get ahead of the competition. So it's dynamic capabilities that we need. And some people in organizations keep doing the same things over and over again and wondering why they aren't getting ahead. They show up for work every day, and the management drives the employers or the employees harder and harder, but they're really not getting ahead. They're just treading water. And that's the nature of a business strategy that's based on strong ordinary capabilities and is marginalized innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, this is an old story. Lewis Carroll, the famous British writer of children's stories, talked, and he wrote Alice in Wonderland, and looking through and through the looking glass, and young Alice noticed that the Red Queen had to run faster and faster in order to keep still where she was or where she is, and that's exactly the nature of ordinary capabilities. You're good at it. You're pushing efficiency. You're taking costs out. So many companies do this, and they're stuck in a commodity product trap, and they suffer from low wages and modest productivity improvements and low profitability. So if you want to escape that trap, you got to move to dynamic capabilities. Now, the U.S. Army in Iraq went through a similar experience. Maybe in Vietnam, the same thing, where you have KPIs in the battlefield that, in this case, as is pointed out here by General Stanley McChrystal, should I say, at first they measured success by, how many enemy targets did we locate, how many pounds of bombs did we drop, how many sorties did we do. That's a measure of ordinary capabilities. It's not a measure of effectiveness at all. So when McChrystal came in, he changed the game completely. And as he defines it there, the real art is finding cooperation with civilian agencies. It's cooperating with conventional forces. It's, quote, tying the pieces together. I mention this just because it's exactly what management is about. It's about figuring out who to partner with, who owns the complementary assets that are necessary, what are the strategies that are likely to succeed, and how do we bring all that together in a viable and coherent way. That's what management's about. It's not about optimization. It's about figuring out these important steps. It's not to say there's not a role for optimization, but if you don't have these steps figured out, you're optimizing on the wrong thing. So here's a way to summarize it. It's a diagram which has dynamic capabilities on the vertical axis and ordinary capabilities on the horizontal. And it basically says is that if you're in a low-risk, stable environment, and it's hard to find business enterprises that today are in low-risk, stable environments, but there may be a few. They're usually in regulated industries. Then you can get by with ordinary capabilities. But you have to have some kind of shelter from competition provided typically by the government. So if you're sheltered from competition, few are, yes, follow the rules of ordinary capabilities. If you're not sheltered from competition and you're competing globally, follow the rules of dynamic capabilities. When I say the rules, follow the guidance of dynamic capabilities. There are very few rules, and the rules keep changing, but follow the framework. So Ed Deming is very famous American, very famous in Japan, because he was the architect of the quality movement, which Toyota and other Japanese companies use to bring low quality manufacturing in Japan to the world frontier. But someone that pushed metrics as much as Deming did was smart enough to say the following: he who would run his business with visible figures alone will soon have neither a business nor visible figures to work with. That's, if you will, a strong advice not to get carried away with the KPIs. Useful in some cases, yes, but unless you've got the right mix of products, unless you're innovating in and of itself, that won't help very much. Now, these lessons that I'm putting forward are really centuries old, and you can even find elements and hints of dynamic capabilities in the work of the famous Chinese warrior strategist Sun Tzu, who emphasized the interplay between Qing and Qi. And Qing, as I understand it, is all about ordinary maneuvers. It's about forces lined up for battle with chariots on the wings, no surprises. You can easily count up and assess the enemy's strength. That is one form of warfare which is very rare. But what's needed in most cases is what he called qi, or unorthodox maneuvers. You've got to figure out how to favor the unanticipated, how to deal with surprise. Change can come out of nowhere and strike from the rear, but also strike from the flank. So these are very old ideas to some extent that I'm presenting to you today. The story of Lawrence of Arabia in the desert was very much about surprise and about guerrilla warfare and making a virtue out of individuality and irregularity and unpredictability. So sometimes you can turn unpredictability and uncertainty on your competitors if you're a business. And if they've got weak dynamic capabilities, they won't be able to respond. So it's not only about your own capabilities, it's also about your competitors' capabilities. And if you've got strong dynamic capabilities and your competitors don't, then you should be able to win in the marketplace. But if they've also got strong dynamic capabilities, like if you have a Google competing with an Amazon, competing with an Apple, all of these companies are fighting fiercely with many surprise moves and very little predictability. Now, dynamic capabilities, as I said, rests on some really significant insights that are really quite old. And John Maynard Keynes, of course, is the Cambridge, England economist who really wrote the general theory of wages, interest, and employment, the manual that helped the world get out of the Great Depression. And Lord Keynes, I think, was trying to understand how investors invest in a context of deep uncertainty. Because he said, how can people, and business people too for that matter, invest when there's many unknown unknowns? And he coined the term animal spirits, because if you're truly rational, you'd stand back and do nothing, so he thought. But he noticed that investors were willing to invest, even with deep uncertainty, and they had an entrepreneurial mindset, no doubt, and he came up with the term animal spirits. And if it helps you, you can think of dynamic capabilities as being animal spirits, and that's what managers need in order to succeed. I know it's a rather vernacular way of saying things, but it does get across the point that you've got to be able to make decisions under great uncertainty. And if you wait around waiting for uncertainty to clear and the fog to clear, it's too late. So strong firms have management teams that are decisive. Weak firms have indecisive management teams. And of course that means you're going to make mistakes from time to time, but at least you have an opportunity to succeed. If you simply wait for uncertainty to clear, it's always too late. Now, that's the end of this module, and I'll come back to talk to you some more about how managers deal with dynamic capabilities. As I've said to you, dynamic capabilities is really the language of Silicon Valley. It's the language of top executives, at least in environments where technology is creating uncertainty. And so I will try and legitimize my framework by giving you some quotes that I think are very consistent with dynamic capabilities that are uttered by by top managers that I respect.